Picture yourself as part of the posh set of British society, where you've just been invited to a one-of-a-kind state dinner. When you arrive, you find you've been placed between two members of the legendary Astor family, though you might not realize it at first. You see, one manages the family's vast property empire while advising a former prime minister's wife. The other just married into the royal inner circle. As crystal glasses clink and silver gleams, you're witnessing one of the most influential dynasties that did the reverse colonial migration from America to Britain in action. Indeed, the American dollars that once bought Manhattan blocks now purchase something far more precious: intimacy with the crown. Thus, in today's episode of Old Money Luxury, we'll share how, during the tumultuous times of Britain in the year 2025, there's one dynasty that maintains their remarkable balancing act of influence, as we describe how the modern Astor family took over the United Kingdom. The British branch of the Astor dynasty, yes, the same lot you've heard about in the film and actual boat Titanic, continues their aristocratic juggling act in the year 2025, wielding their influence with precision and finesse found only in the most tony of circles. You see, in the House of Lords, William Astor, 4th Viscount Astor, performs his democratic duties as one of 92 elected hereditary peers, though elected hereditary sounds more and more antiquated to many. And our esteemed Viscount moonlights as stepfather to Samantha Cameron, whose husband David is a former Prime Minister, making family dinners a fascinating blend of political maneuvering and passive-aggressive requests to pass the salt. Maybe we shouldn't be too jealous of them after all. And Harry Lopes, great-great-grandson of William Waldorf Astor, married Laura Parker Bowles, making him King Charles's stepson-in-law, a relationship so convoluted it requires a flowchart, 3 cups of tea, and possibly a genealogist on speed dial to explain properly. Rose Astor followed suit in the royal adjacent stakes, marrying Hugh Van Cutsum, one of Prince William's closest friends, because apparently there's a shortage of non-aristocratic suitors in Britain, and the upper classes must recycle themselves like particularly posh composting. King Charles's selection of Theo Rycroft, husband of the Honourable Flora Astor, as Deputy Private Secretary, offered an Oxford-level lesson in aristocratic inevitability. In a world where others might call it nepotism, the Astors have perfected the art of making such appointments seem as natural as port after dinner at White's. Young William Waldorf Astor, born in 2012, inhabits that peculiar space reserved for future peers. Between Minecraft and manor management, his education likely includes both cryptocurrency basics and the correct way to address a dowager duchess. One imagines him navigating his prep school years with that distinctly Astor blend of charm and calculated awareness, perhaps practicing his future lord's speeches while his classmates struggle with French verbs. The family's elegant pirouette away from the Cliveden set affair of the 1930s revealed their true mastery, not just of social navigation, but of historical editing. Like expert gardeners pruning an ancient hedge, they've shaped their past into something both imposing and perfectly presentable for modern sensibilities. The Observer's departure from their portfolio hardly dented their media influence. The Astors have always understood that true power in British journalism flows not through ownership, but through the quiet conversations at country house weekends and members' club smoking rooms, where tomorrow's narratives take shape over single malts and subtle suggestions. In 2025's Britain, where old certainties wobble like a butler's drinks tray, the Astors continue their remarkable balancing act. They've mastered that most British of achievements, remaining relevant while appearing slightly bored by the very concept of relevance. Their influence flows through London society like the Thames, sometimes visible, sometimes underground, but always, inevitably, reaching its destination. But the tale of this British dynasty's German-American ancestors' journey from fur trader to financial titan serves as a reminder that sometimes the American dream doesn't end with a white picket fence, but with a country estate in Buckinghamshire and a seat in Parliament. In order to understand just how deep down the gold-plated rabbit hole this old money family goes, we'll have to flip to the next chapter. Now, the ascent of the Astor fortune stands as one of capitalism's most ruthless conquests, a story of calculated risks and brutal efficiency that transformed a German immigrant into America's first multimillionaire. When John Jacob Astor stepped onto New York's docks in 1784, he carried a handful of flutes and an iron determination that would reshape two continents' commerce. The city that greeted him buzzed with opportunity, a raw, expanding port where fortunes could be built by those who could see the patterns in chaos. Astor saw those patterns with crystalline clarity. While others chased quick profits in local trade, he engineered a continental monopoly in furs that would strangle competitors and dominate markets from Montreal to Canton. The 1794 Jay Treaty became his weapon. While others saw a diplomatic document, Astor recognized it as a license to print money, using its provisions to unleash a flood of American traders into Canadian territories. By 1800, his fortune had swelled to $6 million, a sum so vast that it represented nearly 1% of America's entire GDP at the time. But Astor wasn't satisfied with mere millions. He turned his gaze to Manhattan itself, methodically acquiring block after block of farmland and marsh that would become the most valuable real estate on Earth. His ledgers soon showed ownership of over 700 properties, each one carefully selected, each one generating rivers of rent that flowed ceaselessly into Astor coffers. William Backhouse Astor inherited not just his father's fortune, but his relentless focus on accumulation. Under his stewardship, the family's wealth exploded to nearly $50 million, a sum that made the Astors not just rich, but masters of New York itself. Their tenements and townhouses shaped the very geography of the city, earning them the title landlords of New York, though rulers might have been more accurate. But it was William Waldorf Astor, John Jacob's great-grandson, who recognized that mere wealth wasn't enough. In 1891, he shocked New York society by abandoning America entirely, declaring it not a fit place for a gentleman to live. His exodus to England was calculated with the same precision his great-grandfather had once applied to fur trading. He acquired Cliveden, a magnificent 17th-century estate in Buckinghamshire, followed by Hever Castle, the childhood home of Anne Boleyn herself. His London residence at 18 Carlton House Terrace placed him at the literal centre of British power, while his commissioned Astor Estate Office at 2 Temple Place arose as a Gothic masterpiece overlooking the Thames. By 1899, William Waldorf had secured British citizenship, but his true ambition reached higher still. As the new century dawned, he began cultivating connections that would prove useful in the corridors of Westminster, where ancient titles still held sway and a new sort of power beckoned. Numbers revealed the machinery of ambition. By 1891, William Waldorf Astor sailed for England carrying $100 million, a fortune that would stagger modern minds if converted to present value. Behind him lay Manhattan, where his grandfather had first landed with nothing but flutes to sell and an iron will that would reshape a continent. His departure point, the very docks where that grandfather had stepped ashore, stood as a granite monument to 3 generations of ruthless acumen. Before him lay Victorian England, its streets still echoing with the footsteps of feudal privilege, its social barriers anchored in centuries of tradition. Within those first 8 years, he secured the basic prize of citizenship, but this was merely the foundation stone of a far grander edifice. His assault on British society began with precision. $250,000 to Great Ormond Street Hospital, targeting childhood illness in London's heart. Starting in 1897, £5,000 per year flowed steadily into King Edward's Hospital Fund, a perpetual reminder of Astor generosity. Into the towers of Oxford, Cambridge, and University College London, he poured endowments, seeding Britain's intellectual soil with Astor influence. The National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, the British Red Cross Society, the Women's Memorial to Queen Victoria, each received calculated donations, each formed another strand in his web of influence. The outbreak of war in 1914 presented an opportunity that Astor seized with characteristic calculation. £125,000 materialised for the Prince of Wales's National Relief Fund, delivered with impeccable timing. Another £125,000 strengthened Princess Louise's Officers' Families Fund, supporting those who commanded Britain's forces. £200,000 flowed to the British Red Cross, demonstrating Astor's commitment to the nation's wartime cause. £25,000 each found their way to Queen Mary's Employment Committee and the Lord Mayor's National Bands Fund, reaching into every corner of wartime society. These donations represented more than charity. They were carefully placed stepping stones toward a greater goal. His earlier purchases of Cliveden and Hever Castle had secured the physical trappings of aristocracy. Now, his wartime generosity would cement his social position. By 1916, King George V elevated him to Baron of Hever Castle, a triumph for most, but for Astor, merely another rung on the ladder. As he accepted his peerage, his mind was already calculating the cost of an even bolder venture, one that would place the Astor name not just in Burke's peerage, but in Hansard's parliamentary debates. William Waldorf Astor transformed English land into English power. In 1910, his son Waldorf strode into the House of Commons as Plymouth's representative, the culmination of a plan decades in the making. The young parliamentarian defied easy categorization, backing Lloyd George's radical People's Budget, even as he sat with the Unionists. His support for the National Insurance Act of 1911 revealed a mind that pursued reform, while his peers clung to tradition. When war erupted in 1914, a weak heart kept Waldorf from the trenches, but he found other ways to serve. He drove efficiency into Britain's munitions factories with the temporary rank of Major, a civilian wielding military authority to feed the guns of France. David Lloyd George recognized useful talent when he saw it, pulling Waldorf close as his parliamentary private secretary. The death of William Waldorf Astor in 1919 thrust his son into the House of Lords as the second Viscount Astor, ending his Commons career but opening an unexpected door. Nancy Langhorne Astor, his American-born wife, seized that door with both hands. She crushed her opponents in the Plymouth by-election, becoming the first woman to take her seat in Parliament. For 26 years, her voice rang through the Commons, demanding women's rights and education reform with an accent that never quite lost its Virginia edge. Meanwhile, their estate at Cliveden evolved into something more than mere mansion. Its 17th-century walls contained weekend gatherings that shaped the nation's course. Authors argued with politicians, while reformers buttonholed royalty, all under the Astors' careful watch. By the late 1930s, these gatherings had acquired a darker reputation. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain found comfort in Cliveden circles as Nazi shadows lengthened across Europe. Claude Cockburn's pen branded them the Cliveden set, a name that stuck like tar. Later, historians would debate whether the Astors truly sought appeasement or simply fought to preserve an empire they had spent generations infiltrating. But in the marble halls of Cliveden, where American millions had bought English acres, the next generation of Astors was already learning to navigate the treacherous waters between public service and private influence. Less than 2 centuries ago, the Astors counted their influence in Manhattan rent receipts. Now they measure it in royal christenings. The transformation began quietly, with a 1929 wedding at St. Margaret's Church, Westminster. There, Rachel Spender Clay, granddaughter of William Waldorf Astor, married David Bowes Lyon, brother to the future Queen Mother. David's charm made him a beloved uncle to young Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret, weaving Astor blood into the fabric of royal childhood. Through him, the American fortune that had once bought Manhattan block by block now purchased something far more precious: intimacy with the crown. Generations passed, but the pattern held. In 2005, Rose Astor married Hugh Van Cutsem, whose family had spent decades in the inner circle of the future King Charles III. Prince William himself served as usher at their Oxfordshire wedding, marking the 3rd generation of royal Astor intimacy. A year later, Harry Lopes, carrying William Waldorf's blood through 5 generations, married Laura Parker Bowles. 380 guests watched as the great-great-grandson of an American immigrant joined his destiny to the daughter of the future Queen Camilla. Laura wore Anna Valentine, the same designer who had dressed her mother for her wedding to Prince Charles. The symmetry was perfect, the circle complete. Where William Waldorf had once bought ancient castles to prove his worth, his descendants now moved through palace corridors as family. From Cliveden's gardens to Buckingham's halls, from Manhattan tenements to Windsor masquerades, the Astors had engineered a transformation unprecedented in modern history. Their American dollars had not just bought English land, they had purchased entry into the bloodline of kings. Today, as royal children play with Astor cousins in palace gardens, the family that began with a German flute seller stands at the apex of British society. Their influence measured not in mere wealth or titles, but in the casual intimacy that comes only from generations of carefully cultivated belonging. And now, we'd love to see you in the comments. Were you aware of the modern Astors and their influence on British society? We look forward to hearing your thoughts. And thanks for joining us for another episode of Old Money Luxury. Cheers, until next time.